The sunset over the New York harbor was as serene as ever. A gentle sea breeze brushed against the eaves of the seafood restaurant, and the waves caressed the shore in a gentle rhythm. At Dream of the Sea restaurant, the staff was busy preparing for dinner, with the fresh scent of fish and the aroma of barbecue sauce filling the air. In a corner, 76-year-old George Anderson sat quietly, slicing fish. His worn work clothes, slightly stooped shoulders, and deeply lined face gave him the appearance of an ordinary old man. But his eyes were different. Even at his age, his clear and sharp gaze seemed to pierce through the world. "Mr. Anderson, your skills are as impressive as ever. Customers keep coming back just for your dishes," said Michael Thomas, accepting a plate of freshly sliced fish with a smile. Michael, in his 40s, owned the restaurant and was the son of George's old friend. George simply smiled in return, saying little. Ever since he lost his wife to the heavens a decade ago, he had become more reserved. He only helped at the restaurant out of an old bond with Michael, whom he had watched over since childhood. "Ah, Mr. Anderson is as quiet as always," remarked Mrs. Parker, a regular customer, to which George responded with a slight nod. Customers were familiar with George's reticent nature. His quiet dedication to his work somehow inspired trust, a strange charm. As the early evening unfolded, the restaurant's usual peaceful routine continued. Michael proudly chatted with customers about the fresh lobsters they had received, and the sound of boiling clam chowder came from the kitchen. However, amid this tranquility, there was an undercurrent of tension. Rumors were swirling about a suspicious group increasing in number in the area. "I hear things aren't quite right down by the docks. Some Crips gang members from out of town are settling in," murmured the patrons, and George's ears caught the conversation. He paused his work briefly and gazed out towards the sea. Having lived over 7 decades, George had a knack for sensing danger, and now he felt that danger approaching steadily. "Michael!" George called out, his voice breaking the silence. Michael turned to face him. "Yes, Mr. Anderson? How about closing early today?" Michael looked puzzled, but he nodded, knowing there was always a reason behind George's words. But it was already too late. Like the unexpected wind from the sea, a crisis was already at the doorstep. The calm of dusk shattered when the restaurant's glass door swung open with a loud crash, and 5 menacing figures entered. They all wore blue bandanas and black leather jackets, with hefty gold chains gleaming at their necks. The Crips leader appeared to be in his mid-30s, with a long scar running down his left cheek. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of intimidation. "Is this the famous Dream of the Sea restaurant?" His booming voice froze the room. Conversations halted, and hands holding chopsticks stopped mid-air. Michael stepped out from behind the counter, his face a mix of confusion and concern. Gentlemen, what brings you here?" Michael's voice trembled, his instincts alert to the danger. The Crips leader smirked, and without a word, grabbed a customer's beer from a nearby table, downing it in one gulp. "From now on, this place is our territory. Pay up monthly, and we'll let you do business in peace." Michael's face went pale. There hadn't been this kind of trouble in the area for a long time. New York was known for its peace, but with recent developments, unwanted Crips gang members had started to arrive. "We can't afford that kind of money. We're just a small business, struggling to pay our staff," Michael pleaded. But before he could finish, a bottle was smashed to the ground with a clatter. Shards of glass scattered, and some patrons screamed. Startled, the kitchen staff rushed out to see what was happening. "Do we look like we're joking? The rules around here have changed, understand?" One of the Crips members overturned a nearby table, spilling food onto the floor. At that, some customers hurriedly began to leave. The Crips watched them with mocking smiles, their confidence growing stronger. "Now bring us some cold beers and snacks. We expect to be treated to some service today." Michael reluctantly returned to the kitchen to prepare drinks and snacks, his hands shaking. In the 28 years he'd run the restaurant, nothing like this had happened before. Meanwhile, the Crips grew bolder, cranking up the music, kicking chairs, and banging tables. Through all this chaos, George Anderson watched quietly from his corner, still holding his knife, continuing to slice fish. There was no hint of agitation in him, as if he had seen such scenarios countless times before. When Michael returned with the beer and snacks, the Crips leader was already seated at another table, helping himself to the patrons' food. Michael cautiously placed the drinks and snacks on the table. "Look at this, bringing out such lousy snacks," the Crips leader sneered, tossing a plate to the ground. "Bring us something decent." Michael's patience was wearing thin. He had lived his life honestly, inheriting the family business and working diligently. He couldn't stand by and watch his restaurant be trampled like this. "Please stop this. You're making the customers uncomfortable," Michael said softly but firmly. The Crips leader's face twisted with irritation. He slowly stood up, approaching Michael. "What did you say? You dare give us orders?" Michael didn't back down, his determination to protect his restaurant and customers clear in his eyes. But his courage was short-lived. The Crips leader's fist struck Michael's face, sending him to the floor. Michael struggled to rise, blood trickling down his face, but the pain was overshadowed by the heartbreak of seeing his cherished restaurant destroyed. "Please, stop this," he pleaded, but his words were drowned by the Crips members' laughter. They seemed to revel in the chaos and destruction. The Crips leader moved to the counter, searching for the cash register, while others continued to wreak havoc. "Let's see some money. Hand over today's earnings," the Crips leader demanded, as he rummaged through the drawers. At that moment, in the corner of the restaurant, an elderly figure quietly stood up. It was George Anderson. He gently set down the knife he had been holding. The small sound caught everyone's attention, and the restaurant fell silent. George removed his apron, rolling up his sleeves. His movements were slow yet precise, his eyes no longer those of an old man. They were like the eyes of a fierce predator. "Hey, what's that old man doing?" One of the Crips members laughed, gesturing to his companions. They laughed along, seeing only an elderly man before them. "Old man, sit down if you don't want to get hurt," the Crips leader taunted, but George paid him no mind, slowly walking toward them. His steps were steady, with a soldier's firmness, belying his 76 years. "Hey, old man, can't you hear? Sit down!" one Crips member barked, approaching George. But George's expression remained unchanged as he calmly advanced. His eyes held a cool calculation, as if he had already assessed the situation. "This old man's not worried about his life," the Crips member began, but before he could finish, George was upon him. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Everyone in the restaurant held their breath, watching. Michael, wiping blood from his face, looked on with concern. He knew little about George's past, making the situation even more unsettling. The Crips leader, distracted from his search, looked up with a sneer. "What, is the old man playing hero now? What can an old geezer do that young folks can't?" But a faint smile flickered on George's lips, a smile of confidence. It was the smile of a man about to reveal his true self, hidden for decades. As the Crips leader approached, his face still mocking, George remained still, eyes calm. Those eyes held decades of experience and certainty. "Old man, I'll give you one last chance. Sit down," the Crips leader offered, but George didn't respond. Instead, he clasped his hands loosely in front of him, like greeting an old friend. To the untrained eye, it seemed casual, but anyone with experience recognized the stance of a special forces operative. "This is annoying. Move aside," the Crips leader grumbled, shoving George's shoulder roughly. That was the moment. It all happened in a flash. George's hand moved like lightning, grabbing the Crips leader's wrist and twisting it in a single motion. A sharp scream filled the restaurant as the Crips leader's face contorted in pain, forced to his knees. George still held his wrist, locking eyes with him. "In a place where people are dining, you should be quiet," George said, his voice steady and commanding, reminiscent of a military officer giving orders. The restaurant was frozen in shock. No one had anticipated this turn of events. "What are you doing? Get him!" the Crips leader shouted at his crew, wincing in pain. 4 Crips members rushed at George, but his expression remained serene, as if he had foreseen it all. James, an elderly man, released the wrist of the Crips leader. He took a step back, adopting a stance that belied his age. At 74, he no longer appeared as a frail old man. His posture was strong and agile, reminiscent of his youth, as if time had reversed. "Everyone, step outside for a moment," James quietly instructed. The remaining patrons quickly exited, leaving only Michael, who watched in shock from the floor. He had worked with James for over 10 years, but had never seen him like this. "Good heavens, Mr. James," Michael muttered, his words lost in the tension of the impending confrontation. The first Crips member charged at James with a fist, but his attack met only air. James moved fluidly, evading naturally, and with one swift motion, he grabbed and twisted the Crips member's arm. It was a flawless takedown technique used by special forces. The Crips member screamed and collapsed to the ground. The other 3 hesitated, but then rushed at James simultaneously. To him, they appeared to be moving in slow motion. His battle-hardened instincts anticipated their every move. Stepping aside, James tripped the second Crips member, grabbed the third's arm, and shoved him into the fourth. In an instant, 3 Crips members lay tangled on the floor, bewildered by what had just occurred. James remained in his spot, his breathing steady, eyes sharp. "Why don't you get up and leave?" he suggested. The Crips members exchanged glances, fear flickering in their eyes for the first time. This was not the scenario they had anticipated. Being overpowered by an elderly man was unimaginable. "You damn old man!" the Crips leader spat, pulling a small knife from his pocket, his eyes filled with anger and humiliation. The thought of being subdued by an ordinary-looking senior had clearly bruised his ego. The knife's blade glinted coldly in the fluorescent light. "Stop it! I've called the police!" Michael shouted in a frightened voice, but the Crips leader was already consumed with a murderous intent, aiming the knife at James. However, James remained calm, even pitying the young man's poor choice. "You should put that knife down while you still can," he advised. The Crips leader sneered, lunging with the knife, but to James, his movements were sluggish. His reflexes, honed by decades of real combat, were still sharp. Sidestepping, James expertly caught the Crips leader's wrist, disarming him in one swift motion. The Crips leader was shocked to see the knife vanish from his grasp. "I told you, put it down," James reiterated, tossing the knife aside. Maintaining his grip on the Crips leader's wrist, James slammed him into the ground with a deft move. The Crips leader groaned as his back hit the floor. The remaining Crips members tried to rise, but James was already prepared for their next move. Pinning the Crips leader down, he glared at the others, a silent warning in his gaze. "Move, and you'll suffer the same fate." "Who are you?" the Crips leader gasped from the floor. For the first time, James smiled, a smile of a man who had hidden his true self for too long. "Just an ordinary old man," James replied simply, though the meaning ran deep. He wasn't one to boast of past glories. He only acted when necessary. That was true strength. Michael, who had watched the entire scene, was speechless. In over a decade of working together, he had never witnessed this side of James. The quiet man who filleted fish and occasionally gazed out at the sea possessed such incredible skills. "Mr. James, who are you really?" Michael's voice was filled with awe and curiosity. James paused, setting down his knife, and looked at Michael, his eyes still serene. "Just an old man," he repeated, but Michael shook his head. He couldn't forget what he had just seen. A lone senior overpowering 5 robust young men. That wasn't something any ordinary old man could do. "No, you're not just any old man. Those moves, that skill, it's not something just anyone can learn." James remained silent for a moment, his gaze shifting, as if weighing the decision to reveal a long-guarded secret. Slowly, he rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo. Though worn by time, its form was still recognizable. The numbers 707 and the emblem of a special unit were inked on his skin. "You're from the Special Forces," Michael murmured in astonishment. James nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "That's a story from long ago. I was one of the founding members." Michael's eyes widened further. A founding member. That wasn't just any military unit, it was the history of the elite Special Forces. This legendary unit had carried out covert missions worldwide. Why is someone with such an incredible background just filleting fish here? Michael wondered aloud. James gazed out the window at the sea, memories flickering in his eyes. "Strength isn't about showing it off. It's about protecting," he replied, a statement steeped in the wisdom of countless experiences and realizations from missions around the world. James resumed his work, skillfully preparing the fish. "Michael, your father was my comrade," he confessed suddenly. Michael looked at James with surprise. His father had passed away long ago and had rarely spoken of his military days, leaving Michael with little knowledge of his past. "Your father and I," James nodded before Michael could finish. His eyes held the glow of old memories. "He was a far superior operative, saved my life on many missions. After he was gone, I promised." Tears welled up in Michael's eyes. He didn't have many memories of his father, but he always felt watched over. Now he understood why. "That's why you came to our shop 10 years ago," he realized. James nodded, handing Michael a perfectly prepared piece of fish. A promise must be kept. The story quickly spread throughout the town, the astonishing event at the small seaside restaurant becoming the talk of the day. Curious townsfolk peeked into the restaurant, some mustering the courage to visit, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary old man. Yet James continued his work quietly, unchanged. His appearance was as ordinary as ever: worn work clothes, hunched shoulders, a face lined with deep wrinkles. No one would have guessed he was the legendary figure from the Special Forces. "Excuse me, is it true that the old man took down 5 Crips gang members by himself?" a customer asked Michael quietly. Michael nodded with a smile, now viewing James through a new lens. A friend of his father and a protector for over a decade, James was an invaluable presence in his life. "Yes, it's true. Mr. James is someone special," Michael confirmed, and the customer looked across at James, who was working quietly, struggling to connect the man with the story. But that was the essence of James. His philosophy was that true strength wasn't about showing off. As the afternoon deepened, the door swung open, and a uniformed police officer entered. He scanned the room before approaching James directly. "Are you Mr. James?" the officer inquired. James paused his work, looking up, and he nodded quietly. The officer looked at him with respect. The Crips gang members arrested yesterday were all part of a notorious organized crime syndicate. There had been information that they were targeting this area, and thanks to him, they were caught all at once. Grandpa William nodded silently. His expression remained calm, as if it was something that was only natural. "In fact, our chief would really like to meet you, Mr. William." Before the officer could finish speaking, Grandpa William shook his head. He put down the knife and looked at the officer. "I'm just an ordinary old man who fillets fish. There's no special reason to meet." The officer looked a bit flustered. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "But the chief said he had heard of your name before, Mr. William. The 707 Special Task Force." At those words, Grandpa William's gaze changed momentarily. It seemed as if old memories were briefly passing through his mind, but he soon regained his calm expression. "That was a long time ago. Now I'm just an old man who fillets fish." Grandpa William's firm response made the officer stop insisting. He nodded lightly with a look of respect and left. Emma watched the whole scene with a smile. Grandpa William's humility and composure shone even more in her eyes. By evening, the fish restaurant was once again full of customers. But today's atmosphere was quite different from yesterday's. The customers couldn't hide their looks of respect towards Grandpa William. They whispered his story in low voices and occasionally mustered the courage to greet him. "Thank you, sir. Thanks to you, this neighborhood is safer now." An elderly couple approached Grandpa William to express their gratitude. Grandpa William responded with a smile, but still didn't say much. He just focused on his work. After the dinner service ended and the customers had all left, Emma brought out a bottle of whiskey for Grandpa William. They sat across from each other and filled their glasses. "Mr. William, you've worked hard today." Emma's sincere words made Grandpa William raise his glass. His eyes were warm. "My father would be proud if he could see this. You're keeping this wonderful place alive." A month passed by. The waters off the coast of New York remained peaceful, and the Dreamfish restaurant regained its usual routine. The only difference now was the way people looked at Grandpa William. Everyone regarded him as someone special. But Grandpa William himself hadn't changed at all. He still quietly filleted fish and gazed at the sea. One sunny afternoon, Emma was tidying up the kitchen when she happened to glance outside. Grandpa William was sitting on a small pier, looking at the sea. His silhouette was solid, belying his 74 years. Emma put down the cloth and walked outside. "Mr. William, what are you doing out here?" Emma approached and asked. Grandpa William smiled and patted the spot next to him. Emma sat down beside him. For a moment, they both silently watched the sea. The sunlight sparkled on the waves, the distant sound of seagulls echoed, and the breeze carried the scent of the ocean. Everything was peaceful. "I used to sit like this with my father often." Emma turned her head in surprise at Grandpa William's sudden confession. He continued to gaze at the sea, his eyes filled with old memories. "We always had each other's backs when we trained in the Special Forces. When you put your life on the line for a mission, the bond between comrades becomes deeper than any other relationship. My father saved my life many times." Emma listened intently to Grandpa William's story, holding her breath. She had few memories of her father, so hearing such stories was very precious to her. "On the last mission, my father sacrificed himself for me. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here now." Grandpa William's voice trembled slightly. Even after more than 50 years had passed, the memory was still vivid. "So I promised to protect your family for the rest of my life. That was the only way I could repay him." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She had rarely heard stories about her father. Her mother never talked about it, and she always believed her father's death was just an accident. "What kind of person was my father?" Emma asked. Grandpa William chuckled for the first time. His face was deeply lined, but his laughter was as lively as in his youth. "My father was strong yet warm. During missions, he was the most composed, but outside of them, he was full of humanity. He always tried to protect the weak and fought for justice. And above all, he loved you and your mother very much." Emma nodded silently, feeling something warm stir inside her chest. Her memories of her father were faint, but through Grandpa William's stories, she could gradually paint a picture of him. It was a great gift to her. "Do you know our unit's motto?" Grandpa William asked. Emma shook her head. Grandpa William slowly rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo in the sunlight. 707 Special Task Force. Strength is not about showing, but about protecting. Grandpa William's voice was full of conviction. It wasn't just a slogan, but his way of life. After decades of fighting for his country as a Special Forces member, he had quietly retired to live as an ordinary old man. The sun was slowly setting beyond the sea. Watching the reddening horizon, Grandpa William and Emma sat in silence. In that silence flowed deep understanding, respect, and gratitude. "Mr. William, you'll keep working at our restaurant, right?" Emma asked. Grandpa William smiled. His eyes held a sense of peace. A promise is a promise, until the end. Emma felt warmth spread through her heart at those words. She now knew that Grandpa William was not just an employee, but a reflection of her father and her protector. And that brought her great comfort. As the sea turned red with the setting sun, the two stood up slowly. The sun was setting, but their story was just beginning. Grandpa William took one last look at the sea and murmured softly, 707, Special Task Force. The wind carried his words far out to sea, like a greeting to the comrades he had fought alongside for so many years. Emma and Grandpa William walked back to the restaurant side by side. Even after the sun had set, the Little Fish restaurant by the New York coast was still brightly lit.